are, as it's such a versatile and important topic. Today's session will focus on the energy transition and sustainable development, as well as non-CO2 mitigation and the global methane pledge. We have an amazing lineup of speakers today, so stay tuned. For anyone who doesn't remember me, my name is Myrna Ahmed. I'm a UNV with UNFPA Egypt Country Office, and I'm focusing on climate change and youth engagement. I'm also a volunteer with the Global Youth Coalition. I'm happy to be one of the facilitators for today, and now I'll hand off to my amazing colleague, Angela Doyle, to introduce himself and remind us all of the rules of engagement.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for that, Myrna. We are once again at session 6, Mitigation 2. So I'd like to introduce myself. So firstly, my name is Angela Doyle, and I'm from South Africa. I'm an environmental activist and also a First Nation citizen, and also a proud member for GYC with the African Champ. For today's session, we will be making use of the Mentimeter. So please follow the following code for contributions, which Myrna will put on the screen for us. The voting code for our Mentimeter today is 88673138, and please utilize the Mentimeter for that. Also, please make sure that you go over to the Google form and that you include your attendance register to ensure that we're able to get full participation. Please remember, respect for all participants, respectful in your languages, we are inclusive, and respect our time and your time so that we are all able to go way forward. I also want to introduce to today's session our speaker today, who is with us, and that's Laura Munoz. Laura is an eco-feminist climate organizer and a communicator from Colombia. She's also completed and has a decolonial approach to activism. And Laura has also been a part of Fridays for the Future for Boycott, which is based in Colombia, and part of the United for Climate Action for Fridays for the Future, MAPA, Most Affected People in the Areas, and most recently with the Abayal community in London, where she is currently based. She has finished her education in gender and international development from UCL IOE. Let us please welcome Laura as she takes the floor today. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, voy a hablar en español.
Hi, so I'm going to speak in Spanish, in English, sorry. I hope everything's right. Okay, so I'll try to share my screen now.
No, creo que yo puedo compartir pantalla, pero ahí la ves.
Okay, so I'll share my screen. I hope you can see it.
You're seeing the presentation, right?
Yes, we can see the presentation on the screen.
Okay. Okay, entonces voy a hablar en español. Okay. Uno, muchas gracias.
Okay, so I'll speak in Spanish. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be part of this. I'm coughing and I feel a bit sick, but well, it's nothing severe. So here I am. You know a bit more about me after this short introduction. I'll speak about the global just transition, which has a lot to do with what we do in the treaty. So basically, what we want to show with this graphic is that climate change is the biggest problem we are facing right now. I don't think that it's necessary to see this graphic to know that climate change is a reality. We are going through a very difficult moment as humankind, and we aren't just facing the loss of biodiversity or extreme temperatures, but also climate. This climate crisis is a cross-cutting crisis that has been experienced for hundreds and thousands of years, and right now we are just reaching the highest levels of it. So this treaty basically states that we need to work all together on an international basis. As you can see, the presentation is in English, and this meme is originally in Spanish, but I translated it into English for this session. And well, it criticizes how we should really be tackling climate change. So here, well, it's a meme. I don't know if it will work, but yeah, so Homer is saying, if you don't mind, I'm trying to tackle the climate crisis, historic injustice, and inequity. And Marx says, criticizing the capitalist economic system. And then Homer answers in an ironical way, no, with recycling and showers in less than 3 minutes. And then adds, of course, criticizing the racist, patriarchal, and capitalist economic system, which is the main issue. So right now, I'm not going to go deeper into the biggest aspects of this risk and climate change, but I'll focus on our work in the treaty. So what do we do? Well, we tackle fossil fuels. The IPCC has shown and stated in 2021 that oil, gas, and coal are the primary cause of the climate emergency. In the last decade, they've been responsible for over 86% of all carbon emissions in the past decade, as I said. So we need to get rid of these elements. So this treaty aims to facilitate the transition so that it is rapid and fair, just. We don't only focus in the emissions, but also they're linked to injustice and inequality. When we have a big project of fossil fuel extraction, then there's also, it leads to a loss of biodiversity, many human rights do happen and are violated. It comes with a lot of violence. And so there are several reports and documents that show the violence that some indigenous and other agroecological leaders suffer and experience. And I do say that also from my own experience in Colombia. So in this graphic, just a moment, this graphic shows our history. So right now we are in 2023, but well, 2020 is quite near from this moment. And this shows that if we keep this track, and even with the NDC claims, we won't be reaching and meeting our goals. So yeah, the temperature will rise over 1.5 degrees Celsius. If we keep on this track, we would be reaching or we would be producing 110% more of fossil fuels than we actually need. But I would also like to mention something. I would like to stress this because my activism is also focused on the social side of it and also on my experience in these territories. And this is not only about mitigating the gas and
Hi, Laura.
emissions.
Before you keep going, and so sorry to interrupt, but could you please turn your slides onto full screen because they're a little bit small on the Zoom and the YouTube right now.
Okay. Like this?
Yes,
Better?
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, thank you.
No worries. Entonces, sí, pues estaba diciendo básicamente.
Yeah, so as I was saying, when we speak about mitigation, it's not only about mitigating the greenhouse gas emissions, but the whole impact that the temperature rise and loss of biodiversity and the rise of the seas, etc. So all the implication that that has. So the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty does have 3 pillars. This treaty isn't a written document that has been agreed and is ready to be distributed, but it is an initiative that has 3 pillars. And we do speak about just transition, but we do not have a formal written document. The idea is that once the countries are part of it and taking into account their own needs, we will be developing a document. Sorry, I was having a look at the chat. So, 3 pillars. First of all, non-proliferation. This means that we need to stop the coal, oil, and gas projects. Then, the second pillar, we need a fair phase out from fossil fuels, taking into account the goals of the Paris Agreement, and also taking into account the importance of having a just transition. The banks, the wealthiest countries and companies should be the one financing this transition. They are the ones who have more power and more resources to carry out this transition. And last but not least, we'll be speaking about a just transition. Yeah, oops. A just transition. Yeah, so now I'll go further into detail. So we do have different dimensions of fair transition. It is all based on reparation. So those who caused the climate crisis, those who have bigger responsibility should be the ones financing the transition. However, I believe that it is also important to see it in another way. We who are in the global south and who have also experienced all the implications of climate crisis need to raise their voices to also protect their rights and livelihood. So a just transition needs to be socio-environmentally contextualized and people-centered. And we do have 3 dimensions. On the one hand, equity and just transition. On the other hand, these transitions This needs to be a transition to renewable energy, and last but not least, economic diversification and development alternatives. So this transition is already happening, and now the question is how? How can we do this? Because we cannot continue making the same errors and mistakes. So as for equity and just transition, I have some individual examples and particular examples, and workers started to speak about the just transition a long time ago. And this just transition needs to go further. It's not only about communities and workers, but it's also about a global transition. All countries should have the same chances, and it cannot happen that the fact that one country makes this transition then affects another country. We have also spoken about patent sharing, so that knowledge does not center, is not centered in the global north. I would also like to show this image as an example of equity and just transition. And well, this is another meme, and it says when you visit Europe, and this is an image of the lakes in Switzerland. And then on the bottom we have when Europe visits you, and this is a reference to what happens in Colombia and some other countries. And so here we have some other examples, some open coal mining stations.
Okay, in COP28, we have been holding international discussions, and we can not only focus on abstract terms, we need to focus on local realities and discuss concrete facts based on the experience in different territories. So this is one example about a campaign that was developed not long ago, resisting Glencore, that had the goal of raising awareness about what's going on in this region. The Yucatan communities and indigenous community in Colombia. And here we can see a picture about a message that clearly reflects the problems that these communities have been facing. So the population's health has been impacted by projects, and workers in mining sites also have suffered from human rights violations. So as we can see here on the picture, there was a protest. Okay, so the next slide deals with the transition into renewable energy. As we can see here, there is a need to change the paradigm as far as development and growth is concerned. Those are the hegemonic terms that have been used in the Western world for decades. And we also need to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes as before. Now, I would like to touch upon what's going on in Argentina. One of the things that we have been seeing in the past decades is that the energy matrix has remained the same at the global level. The main source of energy remains fossil fuels at 80%, and the investment in renewable energies has been increasing. Okay, however, fossil fuels continue to account for most of, it remains the main source of energy. So the situation pretty much remains the same. That said, in terms of mitigation, a lot needs to be done. There needs to be more investment. On a different note, development is also of paramount importance. And there is a need to foster renewable energies. That's something that's still lacking in the region. And as we can see here, protests are still taking place in Argentina. An indigenous community organized a protest so as to fight against some lithium-led projects. Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia are some of the countries with the world's biggest lithium reserves. Lithium is used in batteries and other tools. I think that should be noted, of course. And that's why people are using, we're protesting with these messages. We don't eat batteries, and you are stealing water. And when you do that, you steal life as well. And here it says water is worth more than lithium. That's why we're not only talking about coal and gas and carbon, we're also focusing on other components such as lithium. And this leads to the same examples of violence, of pollution, of forest displacement. And they are basically, our world leaders are given more priority to minerals and metals versus life and water. That's why people are protesting. And I have almost reached the end of my presentation. So this last slide focuses on one of the pillars I mentioned before, economic diversification and development alternatives. And we need to foster economic diversification and, of course, other development alternatives. We need to do this based on, oh, just a second. Okay, we need to do this based on this. This is very simple. Last year, the main gas companies that we can see on the screen, we can see them on the chart, reached higher incomes in the midst of this climate crisis and the Ukraine crisis. The world was in utter chaos, and oil companies were becoming richer and richer, bringing more money to their pockets. These graphs clearly show how much they were able to earn. These gas companies are conducting extractivist projects in different regions and earning income thanks to that. So that's the reason why international cooperation is of paramount importance and needs to be based on shared responsibilities, differentiated responsibilities, and also the need for countries with more capital to finance the transition. That needs to be done based on the pillars that I mentioned before. We need to ensure a trust and transition based on those pillars. Okay, and as I was saying before, the transition is now taking place. And that means that it is necessary to invest money to finance actions, because one of the main issues here is that money is not being invested strategically, and that's why we need a concrete, clear approach, a clear energy mitigation approach. And something else I would like to emphasize is that the treaty does not really believe in universal solutions. We need to work hand in hand at the international level. But as I said before, We also need to focus on local contexts so that we can adopt appropriate actions in each territory. We can see here some other international campaigns on the screen. Resist Glencore. We see here as well Stop IACOP, Stop Rosebank, and See Al Yasuni. I think that some of these hashtags were being used in Latin America and Africa, and well, these campaigns have had an international impact, although they were being organized locally. And well, last but not least, I wanted to share a picture about my family's community, Opita. And we feel like the backyard of the biggest actors of the energy transition. In our region, some actors have tried to extract minerals, and that's why we are trying to do our best to resist at the local level. These mining projects are now polluting water. That's our emphasis. And that's one of the main things that we focus on in all of our activism actions. So to end my presentation, I'm showing on the screen my contact information. You can see my email address. You can send a message to me, whether it be in Spanish or in English. And well, the idea is that we expand our network, that other collectives and movements join our initiative and help us fight against fossil fuels, water pollution, the loss of biodiversity. The idea is that we join forces and exchange experiences and share common spaces to work together. And well, I would like to finish my presentation with this meme. I think there is an interpreter translating this. So this energy transition will be hurtful? How so? Well, it will not end capitalism. So this was just a joke I wanted to finish my presentation with.
I'm finished.
Thank you so much, Laura, for a very well and very informative session right there. So again, just Laura's email address for everybody out there. Please do get in contact with her, Youth Against Fossil Fuel Industry, and that's Laura at Fossil Fuel Treaty. We're also going to go over into a 5-minute session for Q&A. So let us use the Mentimeter. You guys can answer. We currently have 2 questions by Andres and 1 by an anonymous user. Are we able to go straight into Q&As? Does everyone have their Mentimeter open? So the first 2 questions are in Spanish. So then if someone can just assist there with translation. And then
On the Mentimeter, I see a question in English. Shall I ask that while you
you can go ahead.
shall I go ahead and ask that?
You can.
So Laura, first of all, I was trying to listen in English just to get an understanding of what you were saying, but I had the Spanish on as well. And God, your Spanish, beautiful. I didn't understand a word, but it sounded lovely. So for the first question in English that we have on the Mentimeter is, for other ecofeminists in the call today, can you share some wisdom on how to strengthen our knowledge?
En español, me imagino. En Spanish, right?
Yeah, go ahead. Or English, whatever you feel comfortable.
No, sí, solo estoy pensando en la...
Okay, no, I will take the floor in English. I would say that we need to connect with other people and processes in local territories. For me, I've learned a great deal of things by listening to other people that don't consider themselves to be feminists necessarily, but that lead territorial projects. And something I always say when I have the opportunity is that in this fight against climate change, it is usually women that in 70% of cases participate in these spaces. So we are the true leaders of all these spaces. It is us who foster these initiatives, and I think it'll be useful to connect with other women and continue to work with them hand in hand.
Thank you, Laura. I will say I wasn't able to listen to this one, but it was great to hear. Angela, do you want to read the second question?
So I'll go to the next one.
Yes.
I'm going to take the question that says, what do you believe is the fundamental way to resolve climate change in your view, Laura? What is the fundamental ways to resolve climate change in your view?
De manera muy
Okay.
I was just thinking.
Well, in a very abstract manner, I think I can go back to my meme, the Sensums meme, and I think we need to understand the complexity of the problem and the crisis we find ourselves in. We need to see how all these problems intertwine: education, health, food security, natural disasters. All of these factors are intertwined, and we need to understand the connections between them. And as soon as we do that, as soon as we question this reality, we can start working on overcoming these examples of injustice.
Thank you, Laura. That's awesome. I hope that answers for those that asked. So it's a very personal one, and it's one that takes a lot of in-depth analysis for the approach. Mara, will you get the next question?
Sure thing. So the next question is, can you share any important articles, books, or podcasts that you can recommend for everybody here to read to follow up on the topic?
El tratado tiene una biblioteca de
Okay, the treaty has a library of resources on its official website. I will put the website on the chat box. And well, the website has different resources on energy transition that can be accessed very easily. And I think I can share the link on the chat box. I have many links in my hand, but I think that's the one that first came to my mind. So I will share that link with you to begin with.
All right, Laura. And the last question is, how can you explain the concept of the just transition and sustainable development in light of theories such as the West defining and limiting how development happens in the global South? Heavy one.
Wait, what do you mean with in light of theories such as the West defining?
While the West defines and limits how development happens in the global South.
It would be like how I do define just transition and sustainable development, yeah?
Yes, like how could the just transition and sustainable development happen fairly, so to speak, while the West defines and limits the course of development in the global South?
Okay, yo la verdad diría que
Okay, I would personally say that Western hegemony wants to capitalize everything. And just to give you an example, next to me there is a flower market. next to my house, and there has been a boom. Many people want to have plants at home. They want to become plant parents. However, this market is, how can I put it? It is well known here in London. I am based in London. And the only thing they care about is to sell plants, to promote this culture of consumerism. So they really don't question or try to understand everything that's going on behind. And what's going on behind? These plants live only 3 months because the buyers don't know how to take care of them. The sellers sell them just because to make money, but they don't provide information to users, and they are not interested in helping them learn about the plants. So far, well, people buy plants and they live for only 3 months and then buy new plants. So I think that understanding is of paramount importance, and people in many cases only have basic knowledge about plants. So the goal is now placed on consumerism and buying and selling. So as an activist, I do my best not to promote this type of individualism that's closely linked with consumerism. Transition, the just transition and sustainable development also entails learning what we can do as individuals, and we need to take action and understand what our power is as a community, as members of a people. And that's why I talked about uh, redress and reparation. We need to make our demands be heard and understand that injustice has been existent for many years in history, and the time has come to do something.
Thank you once again so much, Laura. And a lot of people had more questions, but we will have to move on. But I don't know if you noticed, but also a lot of people really loved the memes. So thank you so much for joining us and for the presentation and for answering.
Yeah, no, gracias.
Thank you. All right, moving on. I can see that a lot of people are asking in the chat. You can see, you can scan the link for the attendance form here. I think it should also be dropped in the chat very soon. It's going to be open until July 25th. So please, everybody, enjoy the session and don't stress too much about the attendance. For now, I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Simon Benmares, who is a seasoned global leader and renewable energy expert. He brings over 15 years of rich experience across international organizations and the private sector. He focuses on harnessing renewable energy sources in the journey towards a sustainable and just future globally. In his role at the International Renewable Energy Agency, an intergovernmental organization uniting 168 countries, wow, to accelerate the transition to renewable energy, he works alongside governments and the private sectors towards achieving net zero emissions. Amazing. Please go ahead, Simon.
Thank you so much, Myrna, and I'm extremely grateful to be with you and all the youth movements present for these trainings today. Just to check that you can see the slides. I'm sharing my screen.
We can see your slides, Simon.
Very good. Okay. So welcome, young change makers. Today, first of all, I was really inspired by the session with Laura. I think we need more of these stories to really increase the pressure on urging leaders to increase ambition in the next coming years. As you know, we're running short of time. The 2020s are ongoing, and we need more action. And Laura's message was extremely, let's say, comforting, and that the youth is well aware of the issue at stake. Today, I wanted to give you some insight from a different perspective, while reinforcing the message that we need really the acceleration of the energy transition. And I would like to uncover with you the work of an international cooperation to advance climate action. My name is Simon. I work for about 7 years at this international organization called IRENA, the International Renewable Energy and Agency. And I wanted to present how we are trying to shape a future brimming with hope and sustainability. We are an international organization, and actually we are headquartered where COP28 will be hosted this year. So our message to accelerate the message there is very important to urge leaders in December for further ambition. For youth, we actually produce a lot of knowledge materials for free that you can use at your liberty to really create new message and narrative on climate action. And I think from annual statistics to projection in the future, but also engagement. We organize ministerial events on energy transition. We try to foster public-private collaborative framework. We address the issue of geopolitics. For example, recently we published a work on critical materials, which is an issue to deploy at scale renewables. We try to explore specific, let's say, groundbreaking technology like offshore wind technology, and show, let's say, how a world can be powered by renewable. And we hope that youth can be inspired and also can inspire change and create a future that thrives on clean and sustainable energy. I'm going to try with a somber, let's say, a message is that these decades will define our success in combating climate change and reshaping a thriving planet. It is imperative that we break free from the current trajectory where annual emissions are projected to decline only slightly to 35 gigaton of CO2 by 2050. It means we must act urgently, resolutely, and collectively to accelerate the transition to a low-carbon future. These decades, it must become the decade of action, where we push the boundaries, innovate, and implement transformative solutions to safeguard our planet and for generations to come. Together, the youth and also the international actors active in collaboration, we must rise to the challenge and shape a sustainable world that fulfills our dreams and match our aspiration. I think your movement, the youth movement, is well aware that our current trajectory falls short of the net zero imperative we strive for. This reality can be useful because it serves as a call to arms, urging us to demand more from our leaders and ourselves. We must rise above the limitation of the present and forge a new path where our determination bridges the gap between ambition and achievement. Together, we have the solution, the power to rewrite the narrative. Laura mentioned the combat to phase out fossil fuel and ensure that our climate commitments align with our unwavering pursuit of a sustainable future. IRENA has developed a roadmap called the World Energy Transition Outlook that provide recommendations for our member countries. Marna mentioned we are an organization that has 168 countries, members across the world. And looking ahead to 2050, we found out that a remarkable 90% of all decarbonization efforts will be driven by a mix of renewable energy, that that's going to change our world through the direct supply of affordable and clean power, match with energy efficient solution. We also need to electrify what we call the hard to abate sectors and harness new technology, new solutions like hydrogen and green hydrogen there. This monumental shift not only opened the door to a future free from fossil fuel dependence, but also ignites our imagination, offering new opportunity for innovation, progress, human development, and overall a thriving planet for all. Together, we must seize now this opportunity and reshape the energy sector with more, let's say, sustainable and renewable solutions. We also track cost of technology, and every other year we provide an outlook of where are we with the decrease of cost, which is very important when you need to attract financing to renewable energy project and other solutions. And here we see that we are witnessing a rapid decline of energy cost across geographies, And this is this is very good news to put more ambition on climate with the use of renewable. One of the issues is that, of course, as we look to the future, we must acknowledge that currently the renewable energy revolution remain concentrated only in a handful of countries, region, and specific as well technology. This highlights the urgent needs for us to bridge this gap and ensure that renewable energy become a driving force for sustainable development across the globe in the pursuit of a just transition. We must rise above the geographical boundaries and overcome technological limitation. And this is the role of international cooperation, working together, disseminating knowledge to deploy more renewable at scale and faster. And of course, the world of the last century is not the one we are experiencing now. And we bear witness that renewable energy bears a transformational power. Not only do we see a shift from traditional fossil fuel-based generation, but also we witness a change on how we consume energy. Through energy efficiency, smart grid, innovative technology, we can empower communities, individuals to actively participate in the energy transition, fostering a future where everyone has access to clean, accessible, affordable power to drive progress and ensure the well-being of the most of our planet. Arena also is engaged in mapping what are the key innovations that will drive the future, and from enabling technology that helps to seamlessly integrate renewable energy into the grid through advanced energy storage, so a medium that can help to produce at one time and deliver it at another time. We, let's say, envision a world where we create new business models that incentivize and create new economic opportunities for new energy services. And of course, we not only look at this through the technical or technological aspect, we look as well at the system operation to ensure a smooth integration. And we look at as well the non-technical or socio-economic benefit that those innovations will bring by essentially decentralizing energy. So putting this power to, let's say, communities, regions that really can benefit more in a more significant way. So all of those are, I would say, our roadmap, our, let's say, effort we do to disseminate new knowledge and to empower stakeholders from the energy and climate communities to use those recommendations and demand more for climate from leaders on a climate perspective. And of course, this really narrowed down to today's session on climate change mitigation. And we discovered that it centers around one key objectives, focusing on reducing the release of greenhouse gas emissions that are responsible for warming our planet. IPCC is clear on that. There is no other way to achieve the Paris Agreement. And of course, we need innovative solution. We need to adopt more sustainable practice in the private sector, and the citizen needs to adopt more conscious choices on their, let's say, everyday life. By mitigating climate change to actionable, let's say, actions, we pave the way for a future where we thrive, where we create new ecosystems, and of course, when the youth, let's say, have more opportunity to be an actor in this global movement. All that, and Laura mentioned earlier some aspect, but at the forefront stands the groundbreaking Paris Agreement, signed in Paris in 2015, an historical and universal legally binding agreement that marks a new era in our fights against climate crisis. This landmark agreement builds and replaces the outdated Kyoto Protocol and brings everyone at the table to a unified front to tackle the urgent challenge we face now. And in a sense, the goal as well on climate action is to remind countries, and because countries are meeting every day, that we need to pursue additional effort to keep the temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the Paris Agreement sets out a framework to inspire to join forces and transcend boundaries and ignite a collective movement toward more ambition at the climate level. Rooted in the Paris Agreement, there is this national instrument called the NDCs, or the Nationally Determined Contribution. These are powerful tools to enable short-term action, inspiring pathway to push forward the best effort a country can do to transition the development path towards sustainability. These commitments need to be submitted through this international organization called the UNFCCC, and requires each signatory of the Paris Agreement to prepare, communicate, and uphold their NDCs, outlining ambition in the climate mitigation aspect, but also other aspects, and I will come explain a bit more in detail. This plan essentially serves as a collective, I would say, determination to, let's say, reduce emission and achieve net zero, with guiding principles of progression and the highest possible ambition that a country can define. Each party has to revise every 5 years this NDC, and they need to outline what are their, let's say, national plans to mitigate emissions. By May of this year, a total of 193 parties are the countries that have ratified the Paris Agreement, and 99 of them, representing 81% of the global greenhouse gas emission, had embraced enhanced ambition by revising their target upwards and essentially inspiring others to do the same. I will go here a bit faster, but in a good NDC, you will find aspects with governance, so also enabling whole of government engagement with the citizens and the youth in how those short-term climate action plans are devised. There is an important part on mitigation, adaptation, and as well on how to communicate those measures in the country, but also at the international level. And this is an iterative process. And for that, we are bound by shared milestones that will shape our commitments to the Paris Agreement. This year, we approach first global stock take. We will gather at COP28 as a global community to evaluate the stride we have made in implementing our climate action plan. This moment of reflection coming in December and also ongoing with the recent Bonn Climate Conference fuel our determination to accelerate the effort and navigate the needed course correction to achieve those NDCs. The second global stock take will happen in 5 years, in 2028, and will serve as another vital checkpoint to assess progress, identify gaps, and recalibrate our strategies to remain that we are on track to match the Paris Agreement objective. And there will be a final milestone in 2023. And this, in a sense, shows that we need to connect the short term and the long term in terms of how we formulate, how we implement climate action plans. In this intricate interplay, we find a new instrument, horrible acronym, I will spell it out, LTLEDS, or long-term low-emission development strategies, which provide the necessary guidance to optimize the short-term plans or the NDC, while reaffirming the importance of implementing actionable, attainable, and ambitious climate plans. And through our work in the initial steps of those submission of NDCs, we discovered that LTLEDs and NDCs share a critical analytical component, such as sectoral modeling, robust monitoring, reporting, and verification. And this knowledge and insight gained through the process of formulating short-term plans, the NDCs, can be directly applied to the development of the long-term plans, which are toward 2050, and vice versa. This creates a powerful feedback loop of shared learning and enable countries to enhance their strategies and also compare what has worked and what has not worked. This is also an example of in those plans, how many have implemented renewable energy targets and in which the regions they are located. Today, around 183 of those NDCs are integrating renewable energy targets mentioned, and around 153 have renewable targets specifically rooted in their climate action plan. Importantly, as well, those are for us fundamental questions that you need to integrate, internalize to, let's say, when you have this discussion on ambition, on mitigation, on how to really engage to a solid discussion with your government, with your regional authorities, and so on how to accelerate raising ambition process. So increasing awareness is important. Matching those, let's say, call for action with the national planning processes, strengthening links between human development and climate change is very important, and building capacity over time, training people in the government, outside the government, on how to really develop, implement those policies, and driving investment at the end. This is very important. I'm going to give you a few examples, if I have still some time, to what typical actions can be implemented with countries. And I'm going to use the work of Arena, and specifically as well my team that has been involved in supporting the enhancement in climate and implementation of climate action plan. So generally, we help to support the design, the update, implementation. And we, in my team, have a focus on the technology aspects. And we go beyond the power sector, conducting comprehensive sector analysis that unlock transformative solutions. We try to work with the national parties to assess the co-benefits of mitigation and adaptation, and demonstrating how action can really drive down emission. This is very important. Very often, action has nothing to do with emission, and it's very important to reduce, to match net zero objective. You need to talk about how to reduce emission. And for that, we empower actually countries to embrace new solution, cutting edge technology, the newest storage solution, the newest mobility solution, the newest end-use solution, and we try to build the capacity. So we spend time with local stakeholders to really devise plans that are robust, credible, and actionable in the short term. One very effective tool is the analysis, the cost benefit CBA, or the cost effectiveness of what countries are proposing. And this should not be like a confrontation. We try to be very open and transparent with the country. They give us the data, and we tell them whether their current plan are, let's say, aligned with the best cost-effective solution, let's say, available globally. More and more, we are asked as well to look at beyond the power sector, so beyond the transmission line, the solar PV solution. We are asked to go beyond that, and there's a lot of discussion about how to decarbonize the transport sector. It's not only about electric vehicles, it's about public transport, it's about let's say modality. So if you have short distances, please don't take your car, walk, take a bike, and so on. At the end, to really create a movement around decarbonization in this sector. And of course, in those industrial and building sectors, using new method to remove emissions. So for example, when you want to produce cement, all those industrial materials, there is ways to reduce the use of fossil fuel. We are also active in fostering communities, global movements. Arena is a co-lead of the Global Offshore Wind Alliance. Why offshore wind? Because a lot of countries have issue with solar and onshore wind because they are intermittent. And intermittent can be bridged. There is many solutions, whether it's combining solution, managing demand, but offshore wind will present a groundbreaking solution because those parks are going to be further in the ocean, compatible with nature, and delivering almost round-the-clock energy due to the high potential in the sea. And when we're going to move to floating offshore wind park, we're going to go even further reducing environmental impact there. And this is what the world needs: stable, dispatchable solution that you can integrate quickly into your plants. And of course, today it takes 6 to 7 years to build an offshore wind farm, but the industry, the private sector, is trying to reduce that in coordination with the government to, for example, accelerate public acceptance and reduce the permitting burdens. So what are the lessons learned I want to give you today? First of all, we must address crucial factors that impede progress while recognizing the immense potential those solution role for transformation. Enabling policies and regulatory framework will pave the way for further deployment of renewable energy. But we must also tackle challenges such as insufficient transmission grid capacity, the capital intensity, and the cost of finance to, let's say, get those projects off the ground. The limited resource data, when you're talking about wind resource, solar resource, hydrological resource, and fostering stable and supporting environment. With those, we can accelerate the adoption of energy and unlocking its power to reshape our world and build a future that is resilient and filled with opportunities for all. We also importantly, from today, I think we need to explore the landscape of climate governance. Just transition is at the heart of that. And we must uncover the vital role of appropriate structures and processes that not only drive and coordinate climate action, but also engage stakeholders, bring people to the table, use the private sector, the agencies, the regions, the authorities. Everyone should have a seat on the table, confront point of view, discuss, and find agreeable solution that can be implemented. This collaborative and inclusive approach will lead to further emission reduction, let's say, solution. And ARENA stands together with the climate community to assist in formulating short-term, long-term strategy that align with development priorities and the sustainable future for all. Simultaneously, we must work hand-to-hand with nations to build resilience against the impacts of climate change through adaptation planning, more transparency in how we develop those plans, and we need to also address the issue of shortfall of climate finance. So building a framework that matches the specific needs of each country with the available funding stream, but also the new one that will mechanically come in the next few years into the climate sphere. Together, let us embrace those essential elements of governance and action that will propel us toward a future where we can thrive, where we can increase resilience toward, again, extreme weather events, and we can fulfill aspiration of the generation to come, the youth being at stake. As a conclusion, I would like to give you with the policy message. I think today we have an abundance of technological options that can serve as a catalyst to further climate action and enhance the ambition toward the achievement of the Paris Agreement. Today, we are marching toward a cheaper renewable energy solution. It's an amazing energy efficiency measures that can be implemented, and electric solution for the other sectors, buildings, power, buildings, transport, and industry. The time of action, I'm sorry, but it's now. We don't have the time for it. So we need to use the available solution that we have today to yield a positive impact and pave the way for a just transition. We need to stand together. We need to align our messages and unlock the potential of those technology across different regions, including in the low and middle income countries where the available finance is not yet there, and we need to really send those messages clearly. As we navigate this path ahead, we need also to extend our support to the country that, as I mentioned, needs further climate finance to achieve their short-term and align with long-term plan toward net zero solution. And we have unwavering dedication of many people in the energy sector and the climate community. We have at hand boundless innovation. Innovators, young innovators are proposing really brutally honest, brutally efficient solution to address those. And with that, we have the power to create a future where sustainability reigns and the promise of a better world is realized. We need to embrace transformation and the use of technology to forge a path toward a greener, more resilient and equitable world for all generations to come. Thank you very much. Over to you, Merna and colleagues.
Thank you so much, Simon. And you're absolutely right. it's been said time and time again that the time of action really is now. Let me share my screen. Please, everybody, remember that you can ask Simon questions on the Menti with the code 8867-3138. Let me just really quickly jump to the Menti now. All right, so the first question for you, Simon, is how is the work of IRENA different from the IEA?
Yes, so I'm not going to spend too much time. I mean, we are IEA and IRENA. We both work on energy, and we are both intergovernmental organization. One is rooted in an acronym called OECD, so the Rich Country Club. In a sense, this is the IEA. IRENA has a broader membership, 168 countries, and we serve a lot of, let's say, needs that are coming from the developing world. And this is what I think sets us apart a bit, whereas we shared a lot of same messages, a solution to achieve net zero, focus on beyond the power solution, and so on. So, I mean, at the end, intrinsically not different, but the point of view arena was created 10 years ago, 12 years ago, to really broader, let's say, discussion on energy transition and the use of renewable energy.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And how does renewable energy tackle the benefit of higher reliability of energy from fossil fuels, given we do not have technologies of energy storage yet?
Okay, good. This one, this is my bread and butter, I would say.
Love that.
We need to break this narrative. You know, before IRENA, I work in the private sector on a technology called concentrated solar power. This solution inherently can provide 16, 18, 22, 24-hour storage without any technical issues. So, as I mentioned as well, the use of those groundbreaking technologies, the use of modern offshore wind technology changed the narrative. And of course, battery storage, I think this is the question in hand, is evolving at a pace we never seen before. We are following a rapid decrease of battery energy storage cost and a solution out there. And today, a lot of, let's say, countries are adopting, for example, tenders or auctions that integrate storage to basically mitigate the issue of intermittency. Intermittency is the problem when there is no sun or no wind. And today we have the solution. We have the answer to provide more flexibility because the modern energy sector will be more flexible. And those solutions are available. And the role of IRENA is to also help stakeholders in the climate sphere, for example, to explain that those solutions exist. We're not talking about only photovoltaic, so electro technical solution, but a wide range of solutions, hydropower, step, the storage of water and so on, provide those storage solutions that the world needs to really ultimately achieve high share of renewable without breaking the grid, without, let's say, increasing, let's say, disparity in energy access.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Simon. And thank you so much for this very informative session. We are going to move now for a little comfort break for everybody to maybe grab a glass of water or just take a breath. But we'll be right back at 5:15 UK time with more speakers. So stay tuned. And thank you again, Simon. I'll see you all in 5 minutes.
Welcome back, everyone, from your break. And I trust you're ready for the next session, which is a very exciting session because we have our youth speaker for today, which I'm very honored to introduce, which is Rosral Rodriguez. Give me a second. So I would like to introduce Rosal to everyone. Rosal Rodriguez is a political scientist dedicated to environmental activism. He is currently at the European Climate Pact Ambassador and a lecturer at the Central University of Venezuela in the field of political ecology. Rosmal is focused on environmental awareness and dissemination, addressing the debate on climate justice, environmental rationality, and social environmental conflict resolutions. Welcome, Roswell. Rosmal.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm going to speak in Spanish, okay? Wait a second, let me put here. Ok. Buenas tardes a todos. Esto es un placer estar aquí.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here. When Bianca invited me to take part, I came up with an important topic. Given my experience with mitigation, adaptation, and CO2 emission offset, and with the European Climate Pact, I would like to speak about the importance of tax and incentives. This might seem a bit complex sometimes, and it does have huge implications in our future, on our planet, our society. So first of all, I like to stress how important incentives are in our economy and society. These incentives can be financial or non-financial, but they work as a catalyzer to foster some specific behaviors and practices, and they also foster innovation where it is needed. This goes further than the economic field. It goes to the social area of things as well. So incentives can actually be useful to make companies and individuals behave and carry out actions that can help us meet our goals. For example, more sustainable business practices, or also make individuals reduce their waste. These incentives can be tax credits, acknowledgement credits, or some special access to markets, subsidies. So in this framework, incentives are vital in order to tackle economic, social, and environmental implications, and they can change how individuals and companies see things and behave to focus on the long term. This is how we can contribute in a more positive way to the planet and decrease our detrimental activities. In the field of renewable energies, we can see very good examples of it. For some years, some decades, governments have offered subsidies and financial support for investigation, research, and better pricing for renewable energies in order to foster renewable energies. And as a consequence of that, renewable energies have skyrocketed in the last years. Companies have decided to invest more in solar, in power, in wind power. This doesn't have to do only with incentives, but it has also promoted innovation so that it meets our needs better. And we have developed better and new technologies in the renewables field. It's true. Individual actions have a very small impact if we compare it with the production system, which is the main agent carrying out these emissions, doing these emissions. But if we acknowledge our own behavior and our own impact, we can also share that with the people who are around us, with our family, with our friends. And so I'm sure that all the people that are here, that are taking part in these workshops, will be living the future because their point of view, their perspective will be aligned, with the needs of our planet. And then in the private sector, we cannot forget about taxes. When we speak about taxes, we think about it maybe in a negative way sometimes because they are a charge for us, but well, it's not a burden. A tax is very important also in the environmental area. They are very powerful to influence behaviors. But instead of fostering some practices, taxes aim to dissuade people from doing them, to deter people from carrying out those activities. So their objective is to make some activities less attractive, which is fundamental when fighting and tackling climate change. We can mention carbon taxes, for example. They put a price on greenhouse gases emissions. And so this way, companies are forced to reduce their emissions because if not, they will be facing higher prices and will have to pay more. So this is how taxes can be useful in order to foster the use of cleaner and greener energies. However, it is important to take into account that not all taxes are the same.
I don't know if I cut you off mid-sentence, but I will have to tell you that we have 1 minute left on time-wise.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ay,
Yes.
me perdí. Por tanto, los
Okay, I lost track of what I was saying. Okay, yeah, so taxes need to take into account their design. They need to be reflexive, they need to be fair and just, take into account the individuals and companies' capacity, because if not, they could also have an impact, a negative impact on lower income communities, for example, and consumers. So to conclude, it's vital to look for tax and incentives and to teach about tax and incentives that could be positive for our future. It is extremely necessary that both taxes and incentives, which are very important, are used as they should in a positive way, since they are fundamental when tackling climate change. But we need to acknowledge the implications that they might have. We need to use them in a wise way and in a fair way, with a fair distribution. So, well, that's all.
All right. Thank you so much, Rosmal. Please feel free to drop your social media in the chat if you
Okay,
feel like doing
perfect.
that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll move on to our next speaker now. Thank you, everybody. So Dirk Foster is the president and CEO of the International Emissions Trading Association, a nonprofit business association dedicated to market-based climate policies. Dirk brings a long history of public and private sector engagement in energy and environmental policy, because he spent a decade in the as a managing director at NatSource LLC, the manager of carbon funds valued at 1.2 billion. Wow. Earlier in his career, Mr. Foster served as chairman of the White House Climate Change Task Force in the Clinton administration and assistant U.S. Secretary of Energy and Congressional and Public Affairs. His environmental markets career began when he advised Congressman Jim Copper, a leader in crafting the U.S. acid rain trading legislation in 1990. Dirk, please go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Myrna, for the kind introduction and for having me today. I'm going to try to share my screen here, so please tell me if it comes up okay. I'm just going to, does that look okay?
Yep, it looks great. Thank you.
So I'm just going to take a few minutes to do a bit of a global overview of carbon markets. And this is something I'm sure many of our viewers today read about or study in school or hear about in terms of the Article 6 negotiations that are part of the Paris Climate Accord. IETA, my organization, has a bit over 300 members who are active globally in carbon markets. These are kind of well known in Europe because it's the main policy instrument that's driving change in Europe, driving emissions to net zero. But it's also used in a lot of other places. It's used in China, it's used in South Korea, in Singapore, California, Quebec, some of the other US states and Canadian provinces. And a variation on it is used in some tax jurisdictions, places that have carbon taxes, where an alternative form of compliance can be to use a local carbon credit. I'm going to kind of walk through how some of this works, what the main elements are. And I thought I would just start with this slide to say, if you want to know more about any of this, you can go to our website at ieta.org. And there's just a whole raft of information. And maybe as a starting point, I'll just describe that carbon markets are talked about in a number of different contexts. One of those is the cap and trade model, which is kind of the dominant form. That is a kind of a market where government set a regulatory cap. So a very strict cap where you have to pay fines if you exceed it. But they allow companies to trade the permits that are issued within that cap. So the government will issue a limited number of allowances to companies. Usually some are given out for free to trade exposed industries, and then they're auctioned to non-trade exposed industries. That's the dominant type of credit I guess carbon market that is used at present. The second type is a baseline and credit market, and this is one that's done more at a project level, where a baseline is set for a particular project, and you earn credits for reducing emissions below that baseline. And then once those credits are issued, they're tradable. And those are the types that are used in some of the tax jurisdictions. So the markets are also divided into domestic markets and international markets, as you see in the chart on the right. Some examples of domestic markets would be the Australia Emission Reduction Fund or the California Emissions Trading and Offset System. And an example of international markets could be what we talk about in Article 6, what is used in the aviation market for CORSIA, and the old days of the Kyoto Protocol, what was used there. And then there's also, those tend to be compliance markets. There are also voluntary markets that use private standards, and those are listed over on the right. Am I clear so far?
Yes, perfectly clear, but if you could please speak a tiny bit slower for the interpreters. Thank you.
I will slow it down a bit. Thank you for that. Again, to summarize, compliance markets and voluntary markets and domestic and international. Now with that, we'll dive into that first segment of them on compliance markets. At present, according to the World Bank, there are 73 carbon pricing programs in operation around the world. These cover about 23% of global emissions. They are designed to provide incentives to reduce emissions, and typically they work in concert with other carbon mitigation policies. So since this segment of your program is focused on mitigation, I just wanted to highlight that that's what these markets are about, is driving emissions down to net zero levels. The second thing that I want to talk about is that this is a mix. The different colors are that they're a mix of types of programs. So some of them are allowance trading programs like we have in Europe or California or China, and others of them are more of a tax and offset program like we see in Colombia, South Africa, Singapore, and Chile. So there is some variation, and then the light purple ones are in development. So these are some of the jurisdictions on the map that have announced plans to run a carbon trading program, but they're still developing the exact coverage and stringency of the program. So if you're interested in mitigation, it's important to have at least some sense of what's going on in the field of carbon pricing. In terms of the level of the pricing in these in the trading system, this source at the International Climate Action Partnership, which is a government group in Berlin, it has a tool, an allowance price explorer on its website that I think is quite handy for kind of taking stock of what's happening in various markets. You'll see that the trendsetter here is the EU market that I talked about, where pricing has been up in the 80 to 100 euros range for most of the last year and a half or 2 years. It's currently been trading, or this year it's been trading kind of in the 80 euro range, sometimes down into the 70s, but mostly in the 80 range. Other systems are trading at lower prices, but these typically reflect what's going on in other policies in those markets, but also how stringent the targets are. Europe's is more stringent because they recently adopted reforms that are going to tighten the program so that it will achieve a 60% reduction by 2030. The original plan was for that to be a 43%. So they're strengthening it, and it tightens each year by 4%. So that sort of means that in Europe, by the end of the 2030s, they will have no more credits, no more allowances in the market. It will go to zero. And if anything is emitted, there'll have to be a compensation for that, potentially with a removal unit. But at this point, they're just exploring what a removal unit might look like. Anyway, this gives you a little bit of a sense of what carbon market participants look at every day in terms of where prices are going. Even with these relatively high prices by recent standards, there's still sort of an acknowledgement, I think, by those of us that work in this field that prices are going to need to go stronger. But again, that goes hand in hand with the stringency of the environmental reduction target. So I think this pricing slide shows that only 5% of the current pricing is in the range that experts would say we need to be in to get to net zero. But again, even with that, this is that year of global stock take. So maybe we will see more systems getting stronger, but it's really the price is a proxy for how tight the caps are or how tight the targets are. One of the things that these programs do that is useful, whether you're in an allowance market, an allowance trading market, or in a carbon tax jurisdiction, is that they generate revenue for governments to consider reinvesting in in emissions mitigation, perhaps in hard to abate sectors or in R&D programs or in international assistance. Last year was sort of the highest year on record for carbon pricing. It was 95 billion in 2022. Of that, about 31% was from taxes and just under 70% was in allowance auctions and emissions markets. So these are real cash generators for the governments that are operating them and gives them resources to do good things. So that's a little bit of a primer on what's going on at present in carbon markets, on the compliance side anyway. So I want to talk a minute now about the voluntary carbon market, which gets lots of attention. The way this works, first of all, it's mostly used in places where mandatory markets are not in place. So in Europe, you see some of this because it is from industries that are not covered by the EU ETS. That may change because in the recent reforms, Europe is going to expand the coverage of their emissions markets. They're actually starting a new one to cover road transport emissions and buildings. But I'd say the United States or Canada or Australia, a lot of other jurisdictions also have companies that are not covered by mandatory programs, but they're under pressure from their investors and customers to do more, to be more accountable on climate change. And that leads them into the voluntary market. The voluntary market really exists to, I think of it for two reasons. One is to approximate what a government might do in the future in a jurisdiction. So it's to sort of pave the way for the government to adopt a mandatory program. But the other increasingly is for companies just to demonstrate that they're going beyond the minimums of what's required by law and doing extra for the benefit of the climate. The way these markets work is that, first of all, you have to create an emission reduction. Someone, a project developer normally would go and do this in a jurisdiction that is then certified or verified and validated by an independent entity. These are called VVBs, for validation and verification bodies, because what they do is give an independent look at a project and assess whether it meets all of the criteria for that project type and demonstrating that it's actually reduced emissions. Once that validation and verification body has done its job, it produces a report that is submitted to these independent standard setting bodies. I mentioned them on that very first slide, but that's the gold standard, the verified carbon standard, the Climate Action Reserve or American Carbon Registry. And those standards will review this report. And if they find that everything's in order, they will issue credits into a digital registry that they operate. Then the credits can be bought and sold and traded, but typically this happens once they have been issued in the registry, although sometimes some of them are pre-sold as a way of raising revenue for the project developer to accelerate work on the project. When the the final buyer in the system, say it's a company that's trying to comply with its own voluntary target, once they want to use that credit, they retire it in the standards registry so that nobody can use it again. So in this system, these 5 steps, a credit can be generated and used, and you can assure that there's not double counting because it's only being used once. So this is kind of the life cycle of a carbon credit in the voluntary carbon market. IETA, my organization, has a program that we operate called the International Carbon Reduction and Offset Alliance, ICROA, that provides a code of best practice for companies that are involved in buying and selling in the voluntary carbon market. And part of what they do is review the independent carbon crediting standards for whether they're advisable for use in the voluntary carbon market. Now, you'll notice on this chart, I hope you notice a number of familiar logos like the UN logo, because one of the credit types that they would endorse are the ones from, well, it used to be the CDM, but in the future, they will be credits that are approved under the Article 6.4 mechanism at the UN. But there are also credits by national governments, like British Columbia in Canada, one of the provinces in Canada that has a crediting standard, or the Australian government. Now, these are just some examples. There are others under development. However, also there are independent private standards. The biggest one is VERA. The Verified Carbon Standard is their carbon crediting standard. And VERA is primarily grown up as a crediting organization for the voluntary market. But in some jurisdictions, VERA credits are also recognized in compliance markets. I'll use as an example, Colombia or Singapore, where you can use up to some limits, either UN credits or VERA credits or gold standard credits. One other little complication is, I don't want it to sound like a complication, but the International Aviation Organization that runs the CORSIA program also recognizes private standards that have been reviewed, scrutinized, had quality assurance performed on them, and then been approved for use in those markets. So the ones at the top of this, VERA, American Carbon Registry, Climate Action Reserve, the GCC in Qatar, and the gold standard, those are all approved. Oh, and the UN standard of the CDM. Those are all approved for use in CORSIA. So it gives you a sense of what one of the trends right now is, that there's some convergence of voluntary and compliance markets where credits can be used for more than one purpose. In terms of the amount of activity that's underway in voluntary markets, this gives you just a snapshot of, in 2022, who some of the companies were that were retiring credits in the voluntary market, so you know that they're active using them. Some of these are names that you'll recognize of Delta Airlines or Shell or Volkswagen. But there are also many other companies that are active in voluntary markets. However, one of the things I want to be clear on is that these are really kind of a new asset class that's growing, but the entire voluntary market last year generated something on the order of, I think this is a billion tons of credits that were transacted. But that's the cumulative amount, I think. But it's projected to grow to be about 1 billion a year by 2030. In terms of the current volume, I used those numbers with you earlier about the size of the compliance markets being about 95 billion. In comparison to that, the voluntary markets get a lot of scrutiny in the papers because, you know, public wants to know what companies are actually doing. But the entire market was about 2 billion. So it's really not gotten to the levels that it needs to get to really make a dent in emissions and delivering toward Paris goals. But there are some activities underway in trying to evolve the market, the voluntary carbon market, to come up to a level that's comparable to what compliance markets are performing at. This paper that AIDA members drafted on how they see this market evolving is available on our website, and I recommend it as a way of getting some view of what the future of carbon markets on the voluntary side might look like. These two initiatives on this slide are both focused on upgrades in the voluntary carbon markets to assure that it has the highest environmental integrity. The one on the left is the Integrity Council for the voluntary carbon market. And it's establishing right now, is in the process of completing a second dose of materials that will be released sometime soon. And this organization has developed a set of 10 core carbon principles that any reputable carbon crediting standard should abide by. And this is going to set a new threshold of integrity for all of those voluntary standards on this earlier slide to be judged against. So the Integrity Council, I think, is an important one to watch because it's going to likely require upgrades across the board for many of the carbon crediting standards. On the other side of the slide is the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative, which has recently issued guidance on how corporates should describe the claims that they're making when they buy and retire carbon credits. When should you say you're Paris aligned or on a pathway to net zero, that kind of thing. So again, these are organizations that operate independently under separate boards, but they're sort of related to each other loosely. But it's something that I think is going to provide a serious improvement in the way that carbon markets on the voluntary side operate. Finally, I want to turn to Article 6, because I know many of you track and follow the UN negotiations. And a couple of the earlier speakers talked about the importance of cooperation in reaching our climate goals. And when you read Article 6, it's all about voluntary cooperation. It's thought of as happening both through markets and through non-market mechanisms. I'm just going to talk about the market side of things to give you a little bit of flavor on the state of play. This is a critical article in the Paris Agreement because it's the one that will help us bring sources and sinks together in a way that accomplishes the net zero goals. On the left-hand side, countries can engage in bilateral arrangements or plurilateral arrangements to trade with each other in achieving their goals. They have agreed on the basic accounting framework that says it's basically all about assuring there's not double counting, but that if a country, one country sells to another, they each have to reflect the net trades in their accounts, in their reports to the UN. And Article 6.2 kind of describes that along with the guidance from Glasgow, the Glasgow negotiations on how this should work. Article 6.4 is creating a UN centralized crediting program that will do much of what those voluntary standards do today. But this will do it under a UN supervisory body that will review projects and issue credits at a UN level. We're expecting right now that the supervising body has been established and they meet regularly. But they're plodding along and hoping to issue their first credits sometime in late 2024. So this one is still a work in progress, and you'll still see it on the negotiating agenda. The reason Article 6 is important is that 80% of the countries in the FCCC have signaled their intention to use international market mechanisms or the support from those programs to meet their NDCs or their increased ambition. The reason for this, in a sense, is just driven by the fact that we know we need to go to net zero, but not every country in the world has enough removal potential to meet their goals, to balance out what their ultimate emissions could be. So everybody's going to be on a crash course to reduce emissions as deeply as possible, but there's still likely to be remaining emissions even when we get to 2050, but those are going to have to be fully compensated by removals. Right now, about 20% of the countries are actively engaged in at least one cooperative approach with a partner country. So I think it's a new and evolving area. This gives you a little bit of a graphic on some of the bilateral arrangements. On the right-hand side, all of those are different countries. I think it's about 25 or 27 countries that have agreements with Japan. But on the left-hand side, you'll see that a host of other jurisdictions have these cooperative arrangements. South Korea, Singapore, Switzerland, and Sweden, all with potential seller country partners. We've studied the potential of Article 6 in a series of economic modeling studies. So if you're a math quant geek and you're interested in digging into this, you can find information on it in our on our website. But what we learned was that if countries actually fully leaned into Article 6, that they could potentially save $250 billion a year in savings by 2030. If you took that money and reinvested it in additional mitigation, you could achieve an additional 5 gigatons per year by 2030. We also looked out into the future, and our modeling showed that it could grow to $1 trillion a year by 2050. So this is generating serious amount of financial resources for climate mitigation if countries team up and cooperate. There's that little graphic right in the middle with all the sort of spaghetti chart of all those different lines. What that shows you is the model divides the world into 33 different regions, and their NDCs are sort of plotted by the smaller lines. But if cooperation worked, you would lower the average price down to where that thick red line is, which would enable, again, it creates this flywheel potential of countries saying, well, with this level of efficiency, we could do even more, and scaling up that investment. This is another chart from that study that gives you a sense of who some of the buy side and sell side countries would be, at least according to this model. But I think the important thing here is sometimes you look at this and say, I think my country should stay on the, should aspire to be on the sell side or always be on the sell side. But I think an important message from it is, in this type of cooperation, everybody is better off because the buy side is getting the investment to do more mitigation than it has to do. And the sell side is getting better cost and lowering the economic hit by engaging in the market. So they should also be happy. This is, I think, my last slide, and I'll just wind up that there is some interplay with voluntary markets and Article 6, but the main thing I want to get across here is that countries, the host country, they're in the middle where that authorization word is, they're in charge of whether credits leave the country or stay in the country. Because in Article 6, they have to give an authorization for a credit to be transferred abroad. So they can do so and designate the country that they're issuing to can use it for NDC compliance or for another like this OIMP is other international mitigation purpose, which is talked about in the Article 6 negotiations. So they're in charge if it's used for one of those purposes, or they can say, we don't want it to leave the country, but we'll allow it to be used for a voluntary claim in our country or for a domestic purpose, like compliance with the carbon taxes that I talked about. This is, I think, gives you a little bit of flavor about what you can expect from carbon markets going forward, and sort of the role of Article 6 in helping to achieve the Paris goals. So we'll be watching the Article 6 negotiations at COP28. We're looking to see what progress is made on the global stock take and what countries talk about in terms of carbon pricing. We're hoping that Article 6 negotiators move the ball on some of the open issues there. The supervisory body for Article 6.4 has a number of assignments that it's supposed to report back on. The FCCC itself has to build the registry infrastructure for tracking these credits and assuring that there's no double counting. And then finally, host countries are busy considering, engaging in capacity building activities, but also setting up their own systems for participating in the Article 6 markets. So I think I'll stop there, but I hope that's been a little bit informative about sort of the role of carbon markets and helping both to drive the change that's needed, the transition that's needed to enable the corporate side to deliver on their climate commitments. Thank you so much, Myrna.
Thank you so much, Dirk. And yes, like you said, we will be watching the negotiations. Okay, so I'll jump to the Q&A straight away. And our question is, developing countries have some strong barriers to mitigate the climate pollution, and people are not aware about that. So what would be your suggestion to implement the Paris Agreement in these countries?
Well, I think there's certainly a tie here to carbon crediting projects, because for a carbon credit to be issued, you have to prove that it's additional to what's happening anyway. And the analysis of barriers is one way that you can prove that what you're doing is sort of new and different. And the question is exactly right, that there are a lot of biases in the energy industry in different countries. I think a lot of those are falling away because people see the cost benefits of using renewables, and you have to buy fuel, all of that stuff. But there's still other practical barriers that markets help to bring those to the fore, so that hopefully business and government and NGOs can work together to resolve them.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining us. Just for the interest of time, it's only one question today, but if you'd like to share your email or anything with the chat, please do that. And thank you once again. Angelo, I'll leave it to you to introduce the interactive activity. You're
Thank you,
muted,
Myrna, so
Angelo.
much for that. So for interactive activity, it's really to look at ourselves in a crisis perspective. So the question that I'm going to put out to everyone, and you can use the Mentimeter to answer this as well, is that if there was a solar storm or complete blackout for a month or two, and you were to find a way to survive, what would be the 5 most important items that you'd actually take with you and that you would need? So if you could go over to the Mentimeter and just pop those 5 items that you need, and at least state why one of those items is the most important for your survival. And we call it the sustainable solution, because these types of, okay, wait, I see Myrna went to the other question. how can we mitigate climate change, promote sustainable development, and reduce emissions? If you can poke that question, we'll go with that one. I see that's the one that's on the Mentimeter, so that's fine. So we're going to go with the interactive activity on the Mentimeter.
This should be it. Give me a second.
Okay. Okay, so we have some questions that have been, so adopting a circular economy model, planting some
Algumas
trees.
questões, algumas árvores.
We have 15-minute cities, funding and investment,
Temos 15 minutos,
prioritization for
investimento
mitigation and adaptation,
para mitigação, adaptação,
by using renewable energy,
utilizar energias renováveis,
by educating the public on the effects of climate change and emissions,
educar
and
o
providing
público
examples that the public
e
can
dar
relate to.
exemplos nas quais o público pode conseguir elo de ligação.
Then we had the last one there, which I saw, which was by educating people. So thank you for everyone that has joined today's session. I think we had an awesome session, and I'm looking forward to seeing everyone in the next session. I'm going to give over to Mona, just to give final closing remarks.
Yes, thank you so much. So we do have a couple final closing remarks. First, thank you everybody for joining us. We hope you had fun today. And we just wanted to remind you all, a lot of people had asked us before about a community. So we did create the Slack for you all. If you're interested in joining that, the link should be in the chat. Also, you all received an email. We have a new partnership with Terra, and all participants should have received an email with a link to access. And essentially, it's an exclusive learning space offered by Terra.do. Check your inbox to find all the additional education resources about past and future sessions. And more than just that, we have a feedback form. So it was sent to you in the last email, and it's going to be sent in the follow-up email from today's session. And we just want to hear from you. We just want to know what you guys think of the course so far, what you'd like to see coming up for the second half of the course. And please join us again for the next session next week. We're going to have speakers like Paul Pullman, who is a business leader and climate and equality campaigner, and Chairman Love, who's a global director of advocacy, Nature and Co, and an entrepreneur in residence at Said Business School, University of Oxford. So thank you all once again. Please remember to join the Slack to check out the Terra, and thank you. Have a good evening, day, night, whatever time it is for you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mona, and thank you to all our hosts.
Thank you.